So if we explore the history, we find many answers. For example, dog fighting, it was not a sport of South Asia. It was something which was brought by the British at the time. And so dog was like it was an expression of European elite male self, which was there to defeat the bear and show that it has ascendancy over bear, to defeat the bull, a mighty animal which is, many ways heavier and more powerful than dog, but still dog is able to defeat it. So it shows basically human courage and human technique of breeding that sort of dog which is able to, achieve that masculinity over another animal. Cockfighting, it already existed in South Asia, but in Europe it also existed at the time. And when the early colonial they came, they used to organize cockfighting competitions with Indians, and it was again a space of intimacy, a space of assemblage where they would fight their animals and they build, social relationships with local elites. So near Kolkata, if we find Halim Shar's books, we can see there were many cockfighting competitions that would be annually organized between the British and the local rulers or elites. So, in a nutshell, both dog fighting and cockfighting, they were providing opportunities to Indian elites and the colonial officials a space of intimacy, a space of integration where they could discuss ideas, understand each other, and better govern the local population. Pigeon flying, on the other hand, was not really popular in Britain at the time. There were some pigeon flying competitions, but they happened much later. Pigeon were not used there. It was a South Asian activity. Mostly, if we trace the history, we mostly go to Akbar, Emperor Akbar, who kept 25,000 pigeons in his court. And then we keep going. It was Mughal passion. It remained there among Indians until when we reach the case of Lucknow in 1850s. Pigeon flying was famous pastime there. However, because now British were in more control and power, they started to describe this whole activity of keeping and flying pigeon as a waste pastime, as a way of wasting money, wasting energies, wasting resources. So they started right against it, and then there was at the time more the conception of masculinity was also changing. Now it was not more competitive; it was more gentlemanly masculinity at the time. So they introduced cricket, for example, the sport cherished by Indians and Pakistanis right now, and many other South Asian countries. The cricket sport was basically a way to introduce that gentlemanly masculinity, which would be, different from dog fighting, cock fighting, or pigeon flying masculinity. It 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 basically portrayed the traits associated with Victorian ethos of morality, character, self-control, discipline, everything. So this is like the control and sportsmanship, which they thought basically what the Indians need at the time to become a more reasonable subject, so that the British could govern them more in a better way. So pigeon flying started to lose its status. So this whole conception of masculinity as a more aggressive and dominant masculinity changed into gentlemanly masculinity. This was all part of larger framework of colonial rule, if we see it. And pigeon flying, dog fighting, and cock fighting, and many other animal sports and local sports such as wrestling, they lost their patronage. And these sports then eventually became these sports of lower class people. So once these sports were passion of elites, kings, and raja, maharaja and stuff, and then they become the kind of shock of everyday people. My purpose was to understand the cultural meaning, why people wanted to take their cherished animal, the animal they uh, thought they loved, and took them to sporting activities. I don't call them sport to the activities which involve fighting or competition. So When they went there and they fought their animals, what was the objective of that practice and what they thought they were achieving? I wanted to understand the meaning, and I found that meaning in the local term of izzat or honor. So izzat is basically, as I understand it, it's related with the idea of control. So you control your respect within the village environment, you control your animal, you control your peer group. Like when you go there and you fight your animal, you are in control. And once you win, your control gives you izzat. And once you lose, this turns into shame. So this idea of izzat and shame was so important for me to understand that it translated into the conception of masculinity, which was integrated and interlaced with this idea of izzat. I started to explore different layers of masculinity because I thought there was not only one masculinity which was present at that time in village. Because pigeon flyers, they possess different masculinity, which was more like very soft sort of masculinity. They would fly pigeons, stay on their rooftops, stay there full day, cherish their bird, take them out of the cage, feed them with their own hands, checking their feathers, wings and feet, putting different sort of beads and kind of anklets on their feet. So this was different kind of masculinity from the masculinity deployed by dog fighters, for example. That was more hyper masculinity, or with what Ron Cornell would say, more hegemonic masculinity, where people were depicting those characteristics of Izzat, achieving Izzat, which were famous and popular at the time in their village setting, like showing aggression, showing competitiveness, showing strength, showing stamina, showing courage, everything through their dog. So I wanted to understand those situated masculinities within that context of dog fighting and cockfighting, pigeon flying, and how they impacted the izzat and the shock. So shock was primary motive, which allowed them to involve all those animals into competitive activities at the first time, and then it was their motivation to achieve more and more honor through the performance of masculinity that enable them to fight animals and build that very ambivalent relationship of love, intimacy, as well as violence and indifference.
So throughout my doctoral research, this question of what are these masculinities, right? It became more open and open, right? I was trying to kind of close it, kind of grab it and give it a neat definition, but the definition always escaped me, right? Because the more you learn, the more you talk to these men, at many moments I wondered if there was a thing called masculinity, right? Because it was very fluid and it would appear at a moment and it would just go away, right? So Izzat was a very important way for them to speak about both work and family. What and family? Because there was a lot of the question of Izzat attached to families. Like, for example, for one particular player from working class families, uh, his wife not having to work outside was a matter of Izzat, right? This is different from keeping one's wife inside the house, right? Because the work opportunities available for that woman were not very respectable occupations, right? This family belonged to a fishing community, right? So thought that by giving her a choice to stay home, I'm it's adding to the izzat of the family. Yes, so it also points to certain working conditions available for these women, right? They might be educated, right? Most of the women I met had completed their secondary education, or they had even started their college education. Yes. However, the access seemed little muddy, right? It was not a smooth progression to white collar jobs. Yes. So So that Izzat was also attached to the role of a provider, right? So sport, work, and provider for the families. Right? In those moments, this aspect of masculinity was very clear, right? You have to be the protector, the one who provides for the family. But at the same time, right, their romantic relationships were not particularly sticking with the available notions of masculinity. They were extremely, performing uh, a feminine position in love, right? I say this reserving every problems or binaries of masculinity and femininity, right? Because it's also problematic when I say that they are feminine in their love relations. Yes, they 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 are okay with being vulnerable in their romantic relationships, right? So outside in the playing ground, they can be very tough, but they can also be extremely vulnerable with their wives, with their girlfriends, right? In their loves, they kind of played many other roles, right? And that is why it was very difficult for me to put them in the boxes. So after a point, I just did away with the boxes I had. Right? I was just telling their stories. So yes, Izzat was an important question, especially for a community that was always put in government data as economically and socially backward. So the aspiration to become middle class, yes, was very important.